Faith is the cornerstone of the Warhammer 40k galaxy. Some place it in the Corpse Emperor on the Golden Throne, others in the Gods of Chaos, but at the end of the day, these beliefs drive much of humanity towards one goal or another in the 41st millennia. Faith was even one of the driving factors behind the horrific civil war known as the Horus Heresy, or lack of faith depending on who you ask. The sons of the Emperor who led their legion against the Imperium were all driven by some form of belief, but it was Lorgar Aurelian whose belief helped drive the wedge that tore the galaxy asunder. Lorgar was the Primarch of the Wordbearers, a previously fiercely loyal and successful legion of Astartes Space Marines that fought nobly for the Emperor, who they believed was a god. However, their appeal to religion was contrary to everything the Great Crusade was trying to achieve, and their devotion eventually resulted in the Emperor himself stepping in to correct them and put them on the right path by reminding them what they were fighting for in the first place. This event led Lorgar to a crisis of faith. If his own father, a clearly divine being, felt his devotion to be unworthy, then Lorgar would find someone who accepted and rewarded his appeal to divinity. And find them he did. Lorgar eventually came to know the Gods of Chaos and devoted himself and his legion to their cause and bringing down the Emperor and his Imperium. Through underhanded means, this eventually led to Horus's corruption and the eruption of the galaxy-spanning conflict that killed countless people and led to Lorgar's eventual exile and humiliation at the hands of his brother Horus. But what made Lorgar such a zealot? What were the motivations he had to construct a religion in the Emperor's name and then tear it all down? What happened that made Lorgar who and what he is today? What became of him during and after the Horus Heresy? In this two-part special, we'll get into all that and then some. Welcome back to Starhammer. Lorgar, like his brother Primarchs, was cast from the Emperor's lab under the Himalayan mountains by the powers of chaos before he could be born. The Primarchs in their gestation tubes all landed on random human worlds, and Lorgar landed on the feudal world Colchis. Colchis was a theocratic world ruled by a leadership caste known as the Covenant. Lorgar was found by a tribe of desert nomads who took him in and gave him his name. A couple weeks later, and Lorgar was already grown to the size of a young child. He was then discovered by an exiled Covenant priest named Cor Theron, who was kicked out of the Covenant for advocating forced and, if necessary, violent conversion to their religion. The religion in question here was what was known on Colchis as the Old Ways, which was based on Old Earth religions and was polytheistic in nature. The catch was that these deities that the Covenant were devoted to were actually our classic Chaos gods masquerading as benevolent beings. Cor understood that Lorgar was something special, akin to a chosen one of sorts. He knew he could use the young boy's power to bring down the Covenant and instill his own version of the old ways, which, in his mind, were the right ways. Cor killed the nomads and took in Lorgar, inflicting years of physical and emotional abuse as he attempted to mold Lorgar into being dependent on him and his theology. Despite that, Lorgar came to deeply believe in the Covenant and its teachings, drawing the conclusion that there was only one real god that he referred to as the One, and the other four gods of the Colchis pantheon were led by him and bound together inside Lorgar's own being. Cor Theron saw this as heresy and attempted to beat these beliefs out of Lorgar, but he still remained fiercely loyal to his foster father and his belief in the One. Lorgar even saved Cor's life after his caravan crew mutinied after they refused Cor's order to beat Lorgar for some minor transgression. After that, Cor ceased his mindless abuse and actually began to show Lorgar some affection and titled him Bearer of the Word. As a Primarch, Lorgar soon was able to surpass Cor in every regard. His charisma and speaking skill enticed those he preached in ways that Cor could only dream of, elevating him to the position of archpriest within his sect of the Covenant, known as the Godsworn. Over time, Lorgar amassed a massive army and began freeing slaves from across the planet. He marched upon the capital city of Varadesh, giving an impassioned sermon of battle before the city gates to prep his forces for what was to come, and to display the fervent devotion of his army to the One and to demoralize his enemies. But before Lorgar could attack, the city gates opened to him. Out came the lower-ranking members of the Covenant to place the corpses of the ranking ecclesiarch members at Lorgar's feet as an offer of both peace and devotion to his religion. These were accepted, of course, and Lorgar and his army swept across the planet, claiming city after city, either through peaceful conversion or by the sword. After several years, the Godsworn had taken every city on the planet but one, Gavarla. Gavarla was protected by an ancient device known as a storm generator, which essentially wrapped the city in this furious storm that made it nearly impossible to approach. However, channeling his inner Moses, Lorgar approached the edge of the maelstrom and parted a path through it, allowing his forces to assault the city and finally claim total victory. With the last stronghold of the Old Covenant defeated, Lorgar named Kor the High Priest and explained to his followers that an even greater work would soon be thrust upon them. You see, in his youth, Lorgar had been plagued with visions of this figure in gleaming armor with a blue-robed Cyclops beside him one day coming to Colchis. These visions only grew more intense as Lorgar aged, leading him to believe and prophesize that these were visions of him finally meeting the one god he had devoted his life and his world to. Now, Lorgar's enemies in the Covenant decreed this to be heresy and rallied an army to their cause. The Godsworn and the Covenant then fought a massive holy war against each other. Lorgar and his Godsworn fought for the one, and the Covenant fought for their old gods. This war lasted 6 years, resulting in the Covenant and their ways being wiped out for good, and over a third of the population being purged for their beliefs. After the war, Kor expressed to Lorgar that he still had faith in the old gods, but that the one was the most powerful among them. Lorgar promised Kor and their followers that no more than a year from that day, they would meet their god, who would be known to them only as the Emperor. Sure enough, a year later, the Emperor and Magnus arrived on Colchis to retrieve Lorgar. As you can imagine, Lorgar was overjoyed, seeing his gleaming god before him. He immediately bent the knee, as did his entire world. He accepted the Imperium and its Emperor as their Messiah, and Lorgar led his people to celebrate the Emperor's coming and worship him for the god that he was. After it was all said and done, the Emperor invited Lorgar to take command of the Astartes Legion that was created from his own genome, which he readily accepted, eager to spread the religion of the Emperor to each new world Lorgar would conquer for him. The Emperor, for his part, explained to Lorgar that his Imperium was founded upon the Imperial Truth, an atheistic doctrine that shirked all superstitious and religious belief in favor of science and reason, and that, while he was powerful, the Emperor was a man much like him. In Lorgar's eyes, this only cemented his belief that the Emperor was a god, as only the truly divine would deny their divinity. Perhaps the Emperor thought that Lorgar would eventually give up his beliefs, or maybe he underestimated Lorgar's abilities and intentions. Every aspect of the Godsworn's religion was reorganized around the Emperor being a living god. The celebrations and displays of worship lasted for months, and while the Emperor allowed it, he wasn't very happy about it. Maybe he thought it'd be best to let everyone party hard and get it out of their system. Who knows? Anyway, Kor Phaeron went through the augmentation process to become a space marine and joined Lorgar and his new legion as their first captain and as Lorgar's chief advisor. Lorgar kept his belief in the Emperor's divinity throughout the Great Crusade, eventually authoring a book called the Lectitio Divinalis, which was essentially the holy book for his faith. Lorgar knew his father disapproved of his belief, and while he never disavowed it, he also did his best to keep it to himself. However, with Kor Phaeron and Erebus, Lorgar began to convert the wider legion. This conversion took decades, and Lorgar created the Space Marine chaplains to assist with it, which was later copied by the other legions. Lorgar began teaching that it wasn't good enough to conquer in the Emperor's name. What really mattered were the convictions that drove a warrior to do so. As the heart and soul of his legion turned to worship of the god Emperor, Lorgar renamed them the Word Bearers. This, to everyone else, signified their devotion to spreading the word of the Imperial truth. But to Lorgar, it signified their total embracing of the Emperor's divine nature. At this point, believing in secret was no longer an option. The Word Bearers fought with renewed vigor to free worlds enslaved by false gods, demon-possessed psychers, and crazy tyrants. These worlds had no hope and nothing to live for after all they had been through, and the Word Bearers saw this as an injustice and began to spread the belief of their god Emperor to the worlds they brought into compliance. The results were more than outstanding. While the Word Bearers took longer to bring worlds into Imperial compliance, these worlds showed utter devotion to the Imperium. Lorgar and his chaplains preached to the masses, erecting massive cathedrals and converting millions to the religion of the Emperor, as described in his holy book. But as Lorgar's religion began to spread, so did the news of it throughout the Imperium. Rumors began to build across the stars and among the Imperial forces about what the Word Bearers were up to. But with the Great Crusade encompassing hundreds of thousands of star systems, and as massive as the Imperium is, rumors either didn't reach very far, or if they did, were usually dismissed. The Emperor and the powers that be heard rumors of all sorts of things all the time, but ultimately these rumors were just that, rumors. Without any quantifiable evidence, how could anyone be sure of anything? But it wasn't these rumors that outed Lorgar. It was the rate at which he and his legion conquered worlds. Taking over worlds was a massive and timely endeavor as it was, but rebuilding them and converting the masses was an even longer one. Compared to the other legions, this disparity was too large to be ignored. Investigations were made, and the truth was eventually discovered and reported back to the Big E himself. During this time, nobody could doubt the loyalty of Lorgar, the Word Bearers, or the worlds they had conquered. For over 100 years, they had successfully waged the Great Crusade for the Emperor, who had never once spoken out against his son or the Legion for their worship of him. The Emperor had tolerated Lorgar's beliefs, perhaps thinking that the overall mission of the Great Crusade was more important to worry about, and that Lorgar would put his beliefs aside in order to successfully pursue the goals of the Crusade. And to an extent that was true, but as the Emperor learned more and more about Lorgar's shenanigans, he became increasingly frustrated and concerned. What most concerned him, however, was the slaughtering of non-believers by the Word Bearers, seeing it as a sickening reminder of the sort of thing that the Great Crusade was trying to abolish in the first place. It is said that the Emperor confronted Lorgar during this time, ordering him to cease these religious activities. He called upon another Primarch, Rabuta Gilliman of the Ultramarines, to seek his brutal honesty and advice on the matter. Nobody knows how that conversation went, but at the end of it, the Ultramarines were chosen to be the Emperor's tool of censure. It's important to note that the Emperor didn't want to destroy Lorgar or his legion, but rather get them back on the right path. The Word Bearers were successful in the prosecution of the Great Crusade, just not in the correct way. So the Emperor had the Ultramarines, a detachment of his own Custodian Guard, and his right-hand man Malcador the Sigillite head to the world of Kur, a place very revered by the Word Bearers for their exceptional devotion to their religion, specifically the capital city of Monarchia. Monarchia had the most cathedrals and monuments to the Emperor than any other place the Word Bearers had converted, and it was their prize jewel. On the Emperor's orders, his task force razed the city to the ground, tearing down its monuments and annihilating their temples. Afterward, the Emperor had the entire 100,000-member Word Bearers Legion, including Lorgar, amass on the planet within the ashes of their beloved city. The Emperor psychically forced all to kneel before him as he rebuked Lorgar and his legion for their transgressions and made them reaffirm their loyalty to the secular ways of the imperial truth. The Emperor explained that by constructing this religion in his name, that the Word Bearers had ultimately failed him and the Imperium. He was not a god, and he would not abide anything or anyone that proclaimed him to be one. It was this moment that changed Lorgar forever. He was stunned beyond belief that the Emperor had so brutally denied his own divinity and had punished Lorgar for his worship. As mentioned earlier, for over a century, the Emperor really didn't have much to say about it. The Word Bearers were one of, if not the most successful legion of the Astartes. Sure, they took a bit more time than their brothers, but the worlds they brought into the fold were utterly devoted to the Imperium, always paying their tithes and then some, never questioning or refusing an order from Terra. Lorgar fell into a deep depression as his entire worldview was shattered in an instant. After this, Lorgar and his legion were largely absent from the Great Crusade for quite some time. But when they came back, they were more than a force to be reckoned with. The success they had known in conquering new worlds was even more exceptional, and this time it was with ruthless efficiency. From the outside looking in, you would think that the Word Bearers were doing whatever they could to make up for their past actions. The Emperor certainly did. However, this was just what the Word Bearers wanted everyone to think. While Lorgar was coping with the destruction of his entire personal universe, the voices of the Chaos Gods wormed their way in and offered Lorgar the thing he desired most, the deities worthy of his devotion. You see, Lorgar believed that religion and faith were the building blocks of a great civilization. Without it, humanity would be doomed. He firmly believed people needed something more to believe in, something more than themselves, because for millions of years, belief had been such an integral part in most of human society. Nobody really knows who spoke to Lorgar or how his corruption truly began, though it's largely believed that Erebus and Corferon played a pretty large part, both of them being believers in the four Chaos Gods for quite some time. Lorgar, at this point, no longer believing the Emperor to be worthy of his love and worship, decided to embark on a pilgrimage into the warp, find out once and for all if there were really entities worthy of mankind's devotion. His journey led him to the Cadia system, right outside the Eye of Terror, which was the largest permanent warp terror in the galaxy. Lorgar knew that the primordial truth he sought was somewhere in that writhing maelstrom, and as his fleet approached it, his astropaths cautioned him of strange voices, and worse, what they had sensed within the warp. Some of these voices, possibly those of the Chaos Gods themselves, spoke directly to him. And so Lorgar led a landing party onto Cadia, where they were greeted by primitive, Stone Age humans, and one of them, a Chaos Priestess named Ingethil, called out to Lorgar by name. Ingethil led Lorgar down the path to enlightenment, explaining to him the nature of the Chaos Gods and showing him the fall of the Eldari. The Word-Bearers and their Primarch were shown how the Eldari and their ways led to the birth of the god of pleasure, Slanesh. And they were told that in their fear and ignorance, the Eldari rejected their own god, which led to the collapse of their once great empire. Ingethil warned Lorgar humanity would soon suffer the same fate unless they embraced the four gods of chaos and all they had to offer. Ingethil and Lorgar visited the dead worlds of the Eldari within the Eye of Terror. Lorgar was made to understand the nature of the warp and the entities that inhabited it. He was shown that it was both the heaven humans had always desired and the hell that they had always feared. He was shown a vision of the siege of Terra and his own Astartes decked out in new, shiny red armor to symbolize their devotion to Lorgar's word instead of that of the Emperor. Finally, he was shown the devastation of Tisca and the enlightenment of Magnus into the service of the true gods. Lorgar had his truth, and he now knew what he had to do with it. He bombed Cadia from orbit when it was all said and done, so that nobody could discover the truth as he had, and Lorgar and his legion were the first to fall to chaos. As time went on, they planted the seeds that would lead to the apocalyptic conflict known as the Horus Heresy. And that's it for this one, y'all. Lorgar, to me, is one of the most tragic figures in 40k, and while I haven't liked the Word-Bearers as a whole, Lorgar himself has stood out to me. But what do you guys think? Was the Emperor right to punish Lorgar as he did? Did he have it coming? Can you really blame him for turning against the Emperor? This guy, Christopher Tester, does a fantastic reading of Lorgar, explaining his crisis of faith to Magnus, and I'll drop that in the description down below. But as always, drop a like if you like it, a subscribe if you really liked it, and don't forget to check out my community tab for shenanigans and shitposts. Stay tuned for part 2 in a couple of weeks. I'll see y'all in the next one. Toodles.